Good evening, I'm Belva Davis, and welcome to This Week in Northern California. Joining me now on our news panel are Tom Vacar, consumer editor for KTVU News; Rachel Gordon, City Hall reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle; and Julie Small, reporter for KPCC, Southern California Public Radio. Julie, what was the case before the U.S. Supreme Court, and how did they rule on it?
Well, the U.S. Supreme Court was asked to decide whether 3 federal judges had overstepped their authority when they ordered California to cap the prison population to address violations, ongoing violations in the prisons where inmates are not getting adequate mental and medical health care. And the federal judges said that yes, the prison cap was justified, and they cited the overcrowding. In fact, it was very unusual that in the ruling they included pictures from the prisons, from Mule Creek State Prison, showing the overcrowded conditions in our prisons. We have we had at the time the prison population cap was asked for, there were 170,000 inmates in facilities designed for 80,000. It's that overcrowded. It's forced the prisons to put inmates into day rooms, triple bunks, very bad conditions where it's easy to spread disease, not sanitary, and not enough room to even bring in enough doctors, nurses, and psychiatrists to treat all the inmates and give them basic care.
So, Julie, does this mean, though, that the prison guards are going to go with their keys, open the prisons and let people go out? I mean, how are they going to figure out who stays, who goes? Is it going to be old prisoners, new prisoners?
Well, the state has a lot of options, and I think one of the first options they'll use is they'll transfer more inmates out of state. They already started to do that. They sent 10,000 inmates out of state. So they're going to look for far less drastic options to start with, send them out of state, and then they're looking at a plan that the legislature enacted where they want to shift low-level offenders, nonviolent, lower risk, I should say, offenders to the counties and have the counties take care of them. Of course, that is a little controversial because the counties are saying, hey, our jails are full, we don't have room for these people, we don't have staff, give us money. Well, the legislature enacted a plan, but they haven't enacted the funding yet, so big question marks over that.
Let me ask this, though. Let's say they do have to let some numbers of these people out. I mean, just the economic prospects that those people face once they get out in the street, job-wise and all that stuff, has to be pretty grim given the state of the general economy.
I think that's a very interesting observation. Yeah, I mean, it's hard enough for an ex-convict to get a job, and in this economy, it's going to be even harder.
Is there a political will now saying, okay, they're too overcrowded, let's just build more prisons in California, let's find a way to do that? Or are they saying, let's just work with what we have?
Well, it'll be interesting to see. So far, no one said let's build more.
Prison guards, maybe.
Yeah, the prison guards would like to see more. Or they've actually endorsed this plan to shift the low-level offenders to the counties, and have agreed to actually some job cuts to do that.
Well, at the county level, why should they trust the state's going to have money to make up for the shortfalls that they're bound to face, since the state is broke? It has a budget way out of balance.
Yeah, that is one of the big questions, and the county officials are very nervous about it. They asked Brown to have a constitutional amendment that says the funding is guaranteed, in perpetuity to the counties, $1 billion a year in funding to take over these prisoners. But of course, they haven't even gotten past the first part, which is Brown wanted to extend some taxes, and he can't get the handful of Republicans he needs to get that approved and put it out before the voters to say yay or nay. And so without even that first funding, it's pretty scary for the counties.
Looking at alternatives to incarceration as well, I would guess.
Yes.
Whether it's halfway houses or educational programs or the bracelets to monitor them. I mean, that might be a way that they can say, we will empty some of the prisons and find other ways, especially with the low-level offenders, I would guess.
But I think you'll see a lot of it coming at the front of it, dealing with people coming into the prisons differently, and also trying to stop this churning of people who leave the prison. They're low-level offenders. They leave the prison. Everyone's put on parole who leaves our prisons, and then they have a minor violation. They get sent back to a state prison for 3 months. There's like 40,000 inmates cycling in and out of the prisons constantly. They're going to look at that population first and say, what else? How can we do that differently?
There's long been, excuse me, Tom. There's long been a cry from those that are called three strikers, who were sentenced to life in prison after sometimes a minor offense on the third strike. Are those kind of people going to be considered as releasable? And what about those who are so ill that they won't be able to take care of themselves once they're out? Well, would they be on the list to be released?
Probably. I mean, one of the things they're actually looking at right now is something called medical parole. I mean, you might have heard about it this week. They had the first hearing, and that's releasing inmates who are physically incapacitated, and so they say they're not a threat anymore to the public. And if we release them, then it becomes the feds' problem. They have to pay for their medical care, and that saves the state. But as far as the three strikers, this is one of those things where nobody wants to touch that. Nobody wants to touch the three strikes law or look at it. That's not being talked about.
Although aren't some of the judges now saying let's look at different sentencing requirements as well, upset with the minimum sentencing? That could, if there was reform at that level, it seems perhaps there could be a reduction of the prison population as well.
Yeah, and you've seen some groups like the ACLU come out and say this is a good opportunity to look at that again. It's very controversial. The Sentencing Commission in the Capitol, Republicans hate sentencing commissions in California, but it's very unique to California.
Just a little while. What kind of a timeline is this on?
They have 2 years to achieve the reductions. The state's supposed to cut the inmate population. They have to by about 30,000 inmates, and the first benchmark is in 6 months. They're supposed to achieve an initial reduction within 6 months. So I think they've got their plans probably ready to go, and I would expect inmate transfers to be at the top of the list.
This is an old fight. It's been going on for years, almost like the story that Rachel's going to tell us about, and it's about budgets. And that certainly is an old fight that's been going on for a very long time. Two cities, two different mayors trying to figure out how to deal with their pension fund.
Right, and two very different ways to approach the problem. So we've got Mayor Chuck Reed in San Jose, Mayor Ed Lee in San Francisco. Both know they have terrible pension problems. It really stems from the collapse of the stock market a couple of years ago. Pension funds don't have the money they need to be solvent, so they're figuring out how can we save money. Well, Mayor Ed Lee, who just came into office in January in San Francisco, came in as a consensus mayor. Pretty soon after he took office, he brought in business leaders, union leaders, concerned supervisors, everyone into his office, and said, let's see if we can come up with a plan for the November ballot that's a consensus plan where people aren't going to be fighting it. He, in fact, came up with a plan this week that he introduced. The Board of Supervisors is indeed expected to put it on the ballot. I think all but 2 of the 11 supervisors have signed on at this point. At least in theory, they have. And what it's going to call for, it's kind of a share the pain approach. The city will pay a little bit more money. The public employees unions will pay a little bit more money. The retirement age is going to be increased from 62 to 65 years old for most public employees, from 55 to 58 for police and firefighters, public safety employees. And the existing city employees will have to start paying into their health care benefit fund in 2014. So Chuck Reed, let's go to San Jose.
Yeah.
He said, look, we've got a big problem too. He said, no unions, we're going to go forward with this anyway. And this week, with the consent of the city council, they declared a fiscal state of emergency, which he says will give the city emergency powers to go ahead and force some of the same proposals that they're looking at in San Francisco. Higher retirement age, larger contributions to your pension fund. And in that case, most likely there's going to be a legal battle saying, can you do that? We've got our vested rights as city employees. How can you just unilaterally go in and do this?
So two approaches, but both of them stemming from the same problem. There's no silver lining as to money may, as it's at the state,
the printing machines.
Somewhere.
I mean, that's one thing. But we might see a fight in San Francisco because, well, Mayor Lee has this consensus approach he's doing. Public Defender Jeff Adachi, who has made, you go, why is a public defender involved in this? But he has made pension reform, or changing the way that how much money the city puts into the pension, his kind of number one priority. He went to the ballot last year. It looked like for a long time it was going to pass, and then the unions, as well as most of the city officials, said this is a terrible idea, and it was sunk at the ballot pretty resoundingly. Adachi's going back now, trying to gather signatures to put another measure on the ballot, which he says will save substantially more money than Mayor Lee's proposal. In fact, the mayor is looking at his proposal will save about $60 million in the first year. Adachi's saying his will save $90 million to $140 million. That one, if it does get on the ballot and if it does pass, there's a good chance there's going to be litigation over that.
Why does Adachi think it's going to pass now? I mean, if it didn't happen before.
Well, Adachi said it matters how angry people are at the budget right now. And San Francisco's going to, the mayor's going to unveil his proposed budget by June 1st to the Board of Supervisors. We'll see if there are going to be draconian cuts. A lot of getting the pension deal this time with the unions had a lot to do with what the budget's going to look like. Are there going to be layoffs? Are there going to be service cuts? Now, in fact, the largest city employees union in San Francisco, Service Employees International Union, Local 1021, has not signed on to the mayor's pension reform deal yet. They're not not saying that we don't like the deal, but they're saying, okay, if we go with this, if we don't oppose you at the ballot, we want some other things that we gave up in the past. One of those is kind of getting the tiered system for some of the employees made. That's worth about $7 million a year in cuts that they had to come up with in years past when the budget was pretty miserable.
But, you know, vested rights notwithstanding and unions notwithstanding, all that stuff, it just seems that the level of anger, you know, each year gets higher because the financial hole that the cities find themselves gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And that's not to say that all of that it belongs to the pensions or to the workers or all of that stuff, but the workers are basically standing in the way of a train that seems to be coming. Could they be run over by this train?
Well, I mean, it's pretty difficult. If you look at it, and let's look at San Francisco. The city's now paying about $360 million a year for pension out of a $6.6 billion budget. That's supposed to go up more than double by 2014 to $800 million a year. That might mean less money for libraries, for park and rec programs, for police and fire services, for healthcare, social services. You could go down the list. On the other hand, you can't push the employees out, making it so terrible for them that they can't afford really to live in San Francisco or near San Francisco. They've got to find some kind of balance or look at raising revenue in some other way.
Rachel, we have to go to the largest city in our area, that's San Jose. What can those people down there think is ahead for them?
Well, I mean, you have to look at Chuck Reed. He came in to office saying he's taking no prisoners. He has not cared if the public employees unions have said that they don't like him. He's gone and said he wants to lay off police and firefighters. Yes, come to the table. We'll see if we can mitigate the cuts somehow. He's going full steam ahead. And if he's got now the backing of the city council to go forward, they've got to see if particularly the police and fire unions down there, which really have the political power, if they can stop this at the ballot. And if they can't stop it at the ballot, again, we're going to see them try to stop it in the courts.
Okay, so we continue. We are going to continue with the story that Tom Vacar, you've been here often to report upon, and that is various operations by PG&E that puts them on the front page of the paper. This time, they want to charge people who use less energy more than those who use a lot.
In fact, the people that use more will pay less, 17% less. Now, it's a complicated problem, and it's not as obvious as it appears on its face, but it does send some wrong messages about power conservation and all of that. The way it works out is this: that during the electricity crisis, you know, a decade ago, we were in a 4-tiered system. You know, if you use so much power, you're in the first tier, it's very cheap, and it gets more expensive as you gradually go up the tiers. Well, the first 2 tiers were frozen for low-income people, and there was a law passed that these will not be raised without some action by the legislature itself. So the CPUC can't raise it or anything else like that. But what happened was, as the years went by and these people had no increase, the people who were paying in the 3rd and 4th tier, and these are people that are either the big users, you know, you tend to think of the Larry Ellisons and the Steve Jobs, and that may be one very tiny category. But when you think of people and considering the territory of PG&E, from Bakersfield all the way up to Eureka, Bakersfield, Fresno, all of these very hot communities all throughout the valley. Well, those folks have air conditioning, and they were in the 3rd and 4th tier, and they were paying hundreds and hundreds of dollars a month. And PG&E looked at this and said, this is really unfair to them now, because the cost of delivering this service to them is way less than what they're actually paying, and it's really working on fairness. So the great number of people that are paying these higher rates are not the Larry Ellisons or the Steve Jobs. What they are just regular folks who live in places where you have to have air conditioning. So as a result, PG&E said, let's make this more fair. Let's cut the price at the top and raise it a little bit at the bottom. And essentially what will happen is those people at the bottom who will pay a little bit more, but there's so many more of them, will make more than make up for the number of people that are down there. Then they threw in this proposal that everybody should have kind of like a hookup fee, if you will, or a special service fee, $2.40 for low-income people a month, $2.40, and $3 a month for the rest of us. That was uniformly rejected by the CPUC, but they did kind of adopt this system whereby there will be a reduction in costs, about 17% to the people who pay the highest amounts in the state, and there'll be a slight increase for people who are on the lower end. That's basically what the story is.
How slight? Because if you're on the lower end, even a small increase.
Yeah, I mean, it might be a couple, $3 a month, and that can be significant to a person who needs that money to pay for a prescription or something like that. But what PG&E is saying is reality requires this, and the PUC unanimously, with the exception of one person who recused himself, went ahead and said this is okay to do. Now, All of this happens, and I think a lot of this is being forgotten, on the back of the fact that earlier this month, PG&E got almost a $500 million rate increase that we're all going to end up paying at one level or for another, starting June 1st with gas and then January 1st with electricity. So the reality of this whole thing is that the cost of energy continues to go up, that the use of energy continues to go up. As the population of California continues to go up, we're going to have more and more money set aside for that infrastructure, and that's going to all cost us all more money.
Tom, is this to actually make a profit for PG&E, or is it simply to cover rising costs?
Well, with respect to this most recent thing they did on Thursday, which was to change this tiering system a little bit, it's neutral revenue to PG&E. They don't get an extra penny for it, and they don't lose anything. It just shifts the costs around a little bit. The thing that happened earlier this month is very important to PG&E because it amounts to very close to $500 million, followed by $180 billion the following year and $185 billion the year after that. So these are big numbers that we're all going to have to deal with.
But the billions to pay for what?
Well,
I mean, new cars and yachts, or is it to pay for new infrastructure?
It's to pay for new infrastructure, it's to pay for maintenance of infrastructure, it's to pay for all of the things that go along with running a utility as costs go up. Now, there's one argument that's come up about, well, what about this $500 million they're paying to inspect the gas pipelines that they're doing right now? That's not decided who's going to pay for that. Most likely, consumers are going to have a role in that, but that decision hasn't been made. These numbers are just strictly what is called a general rate case, and that general rate case was decided earlier this month, and then this new tiering system was decided.
Is that providing fuel for those areas who would like to get out of the system with PG&E and run their own systems?
There's no question that this will give people that want to have home power some sort of impetus. And the other thing that it says is that if you're living out in these hot areas, you have less of an incentive now to install solar, less of an incentive to do alternative energy, and that sends a bad message. So as a result, this is controversial, and we will see just how well it goes over.
Well, my thanks to all of you for joining us here tonight.